Chapter 1, Charles Wallace. There are dragons in the twins' vegetable garden. Meg's kind of like, huh. Why? Why does Meg not believe him?
Because it's really outlandish.
Yeah, because there aren't really any such things as dragons. So they make their way across the lawn. They go off to the gardens. And skipping several pages, Charles Wallace tells Meg he was here and then he sort of wasn't here. Bottom of page 4. What do you mean? He was here or he wasn't here? I mean, either he was or he wasn't. It can't be both. He says, well, he was there. Then I went to look closer. He wasn't there. And I followed him. Well, not really him, but I followed where he'd been. She's kind of like, And then she notices him. Page 5. She noticed he's breathing heavily, as if he had been running, though they had not been walking rapidly. His face was pale, his forehead beaded with perspiration, as though from overexertion. And he tells her that when he got home from school, his mother was all upset because he looked such a bloody mess. His nose was bloody. Okay, does he look a bloody mess, or does he look a mess entirely from being beaten up?
Not really.
No, it's also partially because of the sickness. And he says, Mother thinks it's more than the bigger kids punching me. What more? And they start to talk about his not quite feeling the way he should be feeling. I get out of breath. He says, page 6. Well, what did Mother say? I mean, Mother's a doctor, right? No, she's a PhD. She's not a medical doctor. And he says, Mother thinks something is wrong with me. But what? But she won't tell him. He says, I don't know. Something bad enough so her worry blips loud and clear. I know there's something wrong. Just to walk across the orchard like this is an effort. It shouldn't be. It never has been before. Previous book, he could walk across the orchard and not have any problem. When did this start? She asks. He says, I've been sort of tired all autumn. But it's been worse this week and much worse today than it was yesterday. In other words, it's been worse this week, worse today than it was yesterday. It's getting bad. It's becoming progressively worse. She notices he normally has an end of the year summer tan or end of the summer tan, but now he's kind of pasty white, top of page 7. Why doesn't Mother of a doctor look at you? I mean, a real doctor. She has. Who? Dr. Luis, we hear. Okay? So, to keep going to where he thought he saw the dragon, pages 8 and 9. And she says, are you sure it wasn't just the rocks you were looking at? He says, no. Meg, they were right by the rocks, all sort of clustered together. Wings, it looked like hundreds of wings. And eyes opening and shutting between the wings. And some smoke and little spurts of fire. And I warned them not to set the pasture on fire. Do dragons normally, in picture books and stuff, have multiple eyes? More than 2? I mean, we hope they have 2, unless they're Cyclops dragons. No, they've only got 2. Okay? Hundreds of wings? No, usually 2. Unless there's hundreds of dragons. And he says, page 9, you not believe me before. In other words, every other time I've said something, you've believed me. She's like, it's not that I don't believe you. In a strange way, she did believe him. Not that he'd seen actual dragons, but Charles Wallace had never before tended to mix fact and fancy. Again, he's 6 years old. He's never confused reality for make-believe. Never before had he separated reality and illusion in such a marked way. So he says, I think they'll come back. Okay? Meg goes back to get a sweater because it's kind of chilly. She really goes back for what purpose?
Talk to the mom.
She wants to talk to Mrs. Murray. She wants to find out what she knows or what she thinks. She gets back and Charles Wallace asks what Mom say. He knows why she went back. Nothing. She didn't mention mitochondria or farandoli. Huh? Why should Mother mention mitochondria? Didn't you talk about them and didn't that get you in trouble at school? He says, I'm extremely interested in them and in dragons. Okay? So we get a description of what happened when he went off to school. Okay? He's in class, first grade teacher says, middle of page 14, I want each of you to tell me something about yourselves. So they each tell something about themselves. And she asks Charles Wallace. She gets to his name on the roll, Charles Wallace. Are you called Charlie? No, Charles Wallace, please. Your parents are scientists, aren't they? Let's see what you have to tell us. And we're told, Charles Wallace, you should have known better, Meg scolded him, stood and said, what I'm interested in right now are the farandoli and the mitochondria. What was that, Charles? The mighty what? The mitochondria. They and the farandoli come from the prokaryocytes. The what? Well, billions of years ago, and he goes into a science lesson, okay? He's 6 years old. He's saying words the teacher doesn't know. Okay, first grade teacher, you wouldn't expect her necessarily to know about farandoli and mitochondria, other than, today at least, you would expect a first grade teacher to have taken biology and learned a little bit about mitochondria. But at the time when this is set, which we don't know when that is, other than men have been to Mars. So it's not set in 1973 when the book is published. Nor is it set in 1983. Though maybe Madeleine L'Engle thought men would be on Mars by 1983. Who knows? So the teacher says, now Charles, suppose you stop making silly things up. And the next time I call on you, don't try to show off. Okay? So he gets beat up after school. Meg decides she's going to go talk to Mr. Jenkins. Now, what is Meg's relationship with Mr. Jenkins?
Pretty bad.
Yeah, he was her high school principal, and then he got,
Demoted.
Demoted to be an elementary school principal. Why? He says to bring the school up to snuff. Is it that, or is it because he's so horrible as a high school principal? Anyways, she takes the bus into town, jumps off the bus, walks the 2 miles to the grade school. We're told, page 17, an old inadequate building, painted the traditional red, overcrowded, understaffed. It did need upgrading. Taxes were being raised for a new school. Okay? So she hides in the broom closet until Mr. Jenkins gets there. So she tries to talk to him. Notice he doesn't let her. It's like, you're not supposed to be here. This is my school. You haven't changed over the summer, pages 18 and 19. You should go back to school. Okay? He says, your little brother's IQ is satisfactory. Meg, top of 20. You know it's more than that. His IQ is so high it's untestable by normal standards. His performance gives no indication of this. Well, why doesn't it?
Because he's being beat up all the time.
And
He's trying to hold back.
he's trying to get along with the other students. So, now, bottom of that page, 20, standing by Charles Wallace on the stone wall. In other words, what was just described happened the previous few days. Charles Wallace asks Meg, why do people always mistrust people who are different? Am I really that different? What was one of the entire themes of the first book?
It's good to be different.
Be yourself. Be different. Okay? Don't what? What was the problem with Camazotz?
It was too orderly.
Yeah. It's rigid. It's ordered. It's everybody is the same. Nobody's different. I look around me now, everybody in here is wearing different clothes. Not one of you is wearing the same shoes, the same shirt, the same sweatshirt, same hairstyle, anything. It's, relatively, how many, about 10, 12 totally complete individual oddballs, so to speak. Okay? Camazotz, you'd all be like the cinder block on those walls. Exactly the same. Nothing distinct. Nothing different. If I asked the question, all hands would go up at the same time and they would all respond the exact same way. Why do people mistrust people who are different? Charles Wallace says. In other words, he's now got to fight the same battle Meg was fighting in the previous year. However, the previous year, Meg was 12, not 6. Oh, Charles, I don't know. I'm your sister. I've known you ever since you were born. I'm too close to you to know. No, she's not. Okay? She's talking about the second question, not the first question. Am I really that different? She's like, well, you're not that different to me. But what's Meg's problem? She's different. Okay? So, they named the snake, Dennis and Sandy and such. She and Charles Wallace talk about the twins. And Meg says, you're a lot brighter than the twins. Bottom of 22. But the twins are far from dumb. How do they manage? How do the twins, what? Get along with everybody. They're smart. They're not as smart as Meg and Charles Wallace, but they're smart. And everybody likes them. Charles Wallace, I wish they'd tell me. They don't talk at school the way they do at home, for one thing. In other words, they act what maybe at school? Dumb? He says, top of 23, I thought if I was interested in mitochondria and farandoli, other people would be too. Yeah, I could just see 6-year-olds going, wow! Explain to me about why farandoli and mitochondria are so cool and fun. You were wrong. I really am interested. Why is that so peculiar? What do we expect of 6-year-olds?
To be interested in like toy cars.
Toys and imaginary friends. Yeah, toy cars, whatever. Okay, all kinds of stuff. Meg says, I don't think it's so peculiar for the son of a physicist and biologist. I do. I would still think it's weird. They aren't children of 2 scientists either. Our parents provide us with all kinds of disadvantages. Meg says, I'll never be as beautiful as mother. Charles Wallace, he's getting tired of this. Like she's begging for praise. Credible thing about farandoli is their size. Notice, he completely leaves the comments about Meg's beauty or lack of it alone. He's not going to go down that rabbit trail. Meg's thinking about her hair, color of a field mouse, straight like a field mouse. And she's like, well, what about it? That is the farandoli. Notice the link that she does. Field mouse, farandoli. Later on, we're going to meet a farandoli that lives in one of Charles Wallace's mitochondria. How is it described? Like a mouse. Okay? They're so small that all anyone can do is postulate them. Even the most powerful microelectron microscope can't show them. But they're important. We'd die if we didn't have them. But nobody's remotely interested. Why? Why are kids at school and teachers remotely interested in farandoli?
Because they haven't really been proving they exist yet.
Okay, you can't see it. Why worry about something you can't see at all? Our teacher has the mind of a grasshopper. Well, that's a little low on Charles Wallace's part. So they keep talking. Meg, I wonder what normal is anyhow, or isn't. Right? Who gets to define normal? Or who does define it? The normal people define it. Anything outside the normal's collective definition becomes what? Strange, different, abnormal. Okay? So what's the normal? If you were to take a bell curve of grades, it looks like this, right? What's the norm there?
70.
It's the average. The average defines the norm. Okay? So what does that mean if you are above average? You're screwed. What does it mean if you are below average?
Still screwed.
You're still screwed. Either way, you know. So what's it best to be? Average. Normal. To get along crowd. Why are you so interested in farandoli? Mother's working on them. Yeah, but she's worked on lots of stuff. You haven't been interested in that. If something happens to our farandoli, well, it would be disastrous. Why? Told you about mitochondria, right? Yeah. Well, they live inside our cells. Gives you an idea of how tiny, okay? Human being is a whole world to a mitochondrion, just the way our planet is to us. What's he talking about? He's not using the words, but he's talking about microcosms and macrocosms. Macrocosm. To our mitochondria, we are macrocosms. Okay? We are microcosms to the solar system. The solar system is a microcosm to the galaxy. The galaxy is a microcosm to the universe. That is, it's kind of an image of, but micro shrunken down. Macro, image of, but magnified. So he says, but we're much more dependent on our mitochondria than the Earth is on us. The Earth can get along perfectly well without people. But if anything happened to our mitochondria, we die. So what's a better analogy for the Earth? What would make the Earth die if it didn't have it? What's water? 75% of the planet is covered by water. Okay? Take away the water, everything living dies. Okay? Well, why should anything happen to them? Why are you saying that? Why should something happen to our mitochondria? Accidents happen. Or diseases. Things can happen to anything. But what I've sort of picked up from others is that quite a lot of mitochondria are in some kind of trouble because of their farandoli. So what do I mean? What does he mean? Accidents happen to people. Or diseases. Plague spreads in Dance with Dead. Something different about this outbreak, just one flight away. Those are 3 little headlines on the Drudge Report because there's been an outbreak of plague, and I can't remember where it is. But people from WHO, World Health Organization, and other scientists are saying, this is different than other plague outbreaks, and this is bad, and one flight away? What does that mean?
That if someone from there just takes a flight somewhere else.
Gets on a plane, starts breathing, coughing, sneezing. What happens to all the air in a plane? It gets recycled in that plane. So you might be sitting in row 44A in a jumbo jet. But guess what? That air that you are breathing and you are breathing out gets recycled all the way up in first class, business class, row 1, where there's only 1 seat. Doesn't really matter whether you are above average or just average economy class, okay? Okay?
Wait, is there a plague going on right now, or was that just an example?
The thing about plague, yeah, no, it's going on right now.
Oh.
And scientists are a little worried that it could be a major outbreak if it's not controlled. I mean, think of what happened, in Western Africa a couple of years ago with the Ebola outbreak. That was pretty bad. So, what are farandoli? Meg asked them. They live in a mitochondria in sort of the same way a mitochondrion lives in a human cell. Anybody know what the mitochondria, because it's never said in here.
It's the powerhouse.
It's the powerhouse of the cell.
I actually watched a video on this, and it was said that a long time ago when they came to Earth, they were living as their own bacteria, and then they entered our cells, and now they're sort of in a dead state constantly, but they're just producing power for us.
That's why he says, I think he says it about the mitochondria. The mitochondria are not actually part of our human DNA. It's
They were their own creatures.
something different, Well, and she asked then why should something happen to mitochondria? Accidents happen, don't they? Disease, people killing each other in wars. She goes, yeah, but why are you so concerned? Okay. Mother thinks she's proved farandoli. You're not talking about all this stuff at school, are you? I learned some things, Meg, But you're not listening. I'm worried. Then listen. The reason this is page 26. Mother's been in her lab so much trying to find the effect of farandoli in mitochondria. She thinks there's something wrong with my mitochondria. That is, this is why I'm sick. This is why my face is kind of pale, my eyes are darkened. If my mitochondria get sick, then so do I. How serious? She won't talk to me. What does that usually mean? If you're ill and your parents won't talk to you about how ill you are, it's not good. Okay? So, 27, Luis the Larger, slithering along the rocks, kind of comes to them and raises up. Charles is like, don't worry, she won't hurt us. Meg thinks she's going to attack. Charles Wallace says there's someone near. The dragons. Bottom of 27. Meg thought she saw a dim giant shape moving towards them. But before she could be sure, Fortinbras came galloping across the orchard, barking wildly. Okay? Charles Wallace says he's going to where I saw the dragons. And what did they see where he had seen the dragons? On the moss, round the rock, was a small drift of feathers. Didn't look like bird feathers, were extraordinarily soft and sparkling. And between the feathers were bits of glinting silver gold leaf-shaped scales. Okay, what do we know about birds?
They don't have scales.
They don't have scales. So this wasn't a bird that left this. And we get chapter 2, A Rip in the Galaxy. They go back up to the house. It's dinner time and such. And Meg confronts her mother. What's this about mitochondria and such? And her mother says, well, Luis, the doctor, not the snake, page 30, thinks it has something, Charles Wallace's illness has something to do with the bad flu strain. That maybe it's not flu at all, but mitochondritis. And that's what Charles has? Don't know, trying to find out. If I know something, I'll tell you. I've already said that. Meanwhile, leave me alone. And we're told Meg's mother never talks to her like that. So why is she now?
Because she's stressed.
She's stressed. She's worried. She wants to get back. She wants to get back into the lab. Okay. They keep talking. 31. And Meg says he's going to have to go back to school, And Mrs. Murray says he'll have to go back eventually. And then things will get harder. If he can just get through these first weeks. In other words, what does Charles need to learn to do? Something that was brought up in the first book about Meg.
To adapt.
He's got to learn to adapt. What happens to living organisms that, according to Darwin, don't learn to adapt?
They die.
They die out. Okay? This apparently is what the mitochondria did. They learned to adapt in us. Bottom of 31. Meg says you can't send him to Harvard at age 6. Anyhow, it isn't just that he's intelligent. How does he know what we're thinking and feeling? He knows an awful lot about mitochondria and farandoli. No, she says, I've told him a reasonable amount. No. He knows a lot more than that. Okay? So they talk about dinner, and Meg asks, what are you going to do about it? That is, about what's happening to Charles Wallace at school, being beat up. We're trying to do nothing. It would be easy for now, to take Charles out of school. We thought about that immediately, even before, that is, before he was sick. But Charles Wallace is going to have to live in a world made up of people who don't think at all in any of the ways that he does. And the sooner he starts learning to get along with them, the better. How different is this from the world we inhabit?
Not very.
Oh, it's entirely different. How so? What do today's parents do all too often for their children?
Brag.
No, that's no different than...
I'm trying to accommodate for them.
Take care of the situation.
They take care of the situation. They try to protect them from what?
Other people.
Failure.
Louder?
Failure.
Failure? From every little problem in life. Child comes home, complains about school, what happens?
They complain.
On the telephone, with the teacher, with the principal, with the professor, it happens. With the department chair, with the dean, with the president. Students' parents have actually called. All those levels. Okay? Why? Because little Susie didn't get a good grade in the class. Well, guess what? Suck it up, Buttercup, and do better next time. Do the work, you know? But it's not that Charles isn't doing the work, is it? He's getting beat up every day. Okay? And what else happens? Parents today intervene in all little spats children have. Okay? Probably when you were 10, 11, 12, maybe even 5, 6, maybe you were fortunate enough that your parents weren't hovering over you all the time so that you and your friends, when you got into an argument, you had to learn to resolve that argument without somebody saying, oh no, we got to do timeout and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk through this. Or maybe you had to fight it out. Okay? She says, we're not going to do that. Why? He has to learn to get along with them. And yet we have college campuses today telling students, you don't have to learn to get along. What do? File a grievance. Somebody's offended you? File a grievance. Whatever the offense is. It might be you don't like having to read a book. File a grievance. Maybe you won't have to read that book for that class. Maybe something else can be assigned. Kind of, harms the integrity of the class because if something else could be assigned, maybe the professor would have assigned something else in the first place. Maybe the whole purpose of that book being assigned is to be offensive, is to challenge one's ideas, one's beliefs. I don't mean challenge like to turn Christians into atheists, or atheists into Jews, or Jews into Muslims, or whatever. I mean to make you think about X, Y, or Z. Okay? Notice she says, neither you nor Charles has the ability to adapt that the twins do. What's that telling us about the twins?
Very adaptive.
Okay, what else? They're going to be fine with life. They're going to go right on along without any problems. Charles and Meg, the implication, however, is unless you learn to adapt, notice, does adapt mean be this?
No.
Does adapt mean not be this? No. It means to learn to be yourself. How?
In a way that, makes sense to others.
Okay. What else?
We still succeed.
In a way that you still succeed?
In a way that doesn't.
Does adapt mean that if you're this, try to be this?
No.
Shouldn't. And yet there are students who are like this, who do try to be this. Why? Because they don't want to be different. When what they need is they need teaching that fits this. Rather than, oh, everybody's in 4th grade. Therefore, you're all the same. You will all be taught at the same level. No, Johnny, you can't read that book. That is a sophomore level, high school level kind of a thing. Charles is a lot brighter than the twins. Mrs. Murray, a life form which can't adapt doesn't last very long. That is, and if Charles wants to live, he better learn to adapt. Okay? Skip a bit. Skip quite a bit, actually. They're talking about why their father is away. Notice he's not away for the same reason he was in the first book. Okay? He's away because there's something going on in space that scientists are pretty concerned about. Bottom of 39. There's been an unexplainable phenomenon, not in our part of the galaxy, but far across it, and in several other galaxies. Easiest way to explain it is that our new supersensitive sonic instruments, sonic sound, not sight, instruments have been picking up strange sounds. Sounds which aren't on any normal register, but much higher. After such a sound, a cosmic scream, the Times described it as, there appears to be a small rip in the galaxy. Dennis, explain that. Seems to mean several stars have vanished. Vanished where? See, one of the basic laws of thermodynamics is what happens to matter?
It becomes energy.
It can be converted to energy. Okay? Energy is still what?
Matter.
It's still matter. You can't take matter and poof, make it go nowhere. She's talking about entire stars. Poof, going nowhere. We're not talking about stars going supernova, where they explode and then they become red dwarfs or giant dwarfs or possibly even black holes, because a black hole still has matter. Vanished where? That is, where'd they go? Vanished completely. Where the stars were there is, as far as our instruments can detect, nothing. Something doesn't become nothing. So she talks about where Mr. Murray was, out in California at Mount Palomar. Sandy, things can't just vanish. We learned that in school, balance of matter. It seems to be getting unbalanced. You mean like ecology? No. I mean, matter actually seems to be being annihilated. So are we Star Trek matter and antimatter and nothing? That's impossible, Dennis says. Sandy, E equals mc squared. Okay, this is a year later than the previous book. They were 10 in the previous book, now they're 11. And they say Sandy and Dennis aren't as bright as Meg and Charles Wallace, but they're not dumb either. 11-year-olds talking about E equals mc squared? I don't know about you guys, but I was 11 in 1973. We weren't talking at 11 years old about E equals mc squared. Not until high school, okay? Matter be converted into energy and energy into matter. You have to have one or the other. Thus far, Einstein's law has never been disproved, but it's coming into question. Dennis, that's impossible, okay? Clap of light, bit of thunder. So Charles Wallace, bottom of 42, top of 43. The ripping in the galaxy have any effect on our solar system? That's what we want to know. Okay? The implication is something that happens out there has an effect here. think of the effect, the thing happening way out there in the outer part of the galaxy, as being like dropping a rock into a pond. What does the rock do?
Cause ripples.
And what do those ripples do?
Affect the whole pond.
Okay. From what we know, basic physics, my voice, if it weren't being contained by these four walls, if we were outside in the oak grove and carrying on this class, every sound we made creates those sound waves, and what happens to those sound waves? They go off to infinity. Now, you wouldn't be able to hear me down at Main Street if I was just talking my normal voice. If I was coaching in my soccer coaching voice, you would hear me down on the square just about, okay? That's what other people used to say. But you wouldn't be able to hear me down on Main Street. Why? For the simple reason your ears aren't fine-tuned enough. But if you had a fine enough receiver, you could hear that voice. And in fact, if we had a fine enough receiver and we went far enough out, we could hear Lincoln giving his Gettysburg Address or his inaugural address. And we could go back in time, so to speak, and we could hear Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. Or we could go back in time and we could hear Gautama Buddha in the 6th century BC. Or we could, if we had fine enough receivers. Okay? So, what effect does it have? Don't know. Skipping a bunch again. Meg goes out to the orchard. Luis the larger shows up. Luis the smaller, the snake, shows up. And starts weaving back and forth oddly. And Meg hears a voice. Margaret? She turns around, it's Mr. Jenkins, Charles Wallace's principal. Your little brother thought I might find you here. And she's like, yeah, Charles would know what I'm here. But what are you doing here? Bottom of 49. Okay. He reaches out to take her hand. She reaches out to take his. And the snake rises up on the wall and starts hissing and acting strangely. And what happens to Mr. Jenkins? He
Turns into a bird, flies away, and poofs.
exactly rose up into the night like a great flapping bird, flew screaming across the sky, became a rent, an emptiness, a slash of nothingness. He becomes this tear in space and time. Okay? Calvin shows up and she tells him about Mr. Jenkins. She tells him about Charles Wallace's dragons. And he's like, okay. He goes to talk to Charles Wallace, wants to apologize for his little brother beating up Charles Wallace, and pick up with 56 and 57. He's talking with Meg. Actually, this is before he goes. He's talking with Meg, and he says, you Murrays, middle of the page, you Murrays certainly aren't like anybody else. She says, you've managed, that is, you get along with us, you like us. He says, yeah, same way the twins have, playing by the laws of the jungle. You know that. That's how I get along with people. The O'Keefes may be shiftless, but at least we're not newcomers. See, the Murrays are new to this, or relatively new, to this small, tight-knit, closed community. But the O'Keefes have apparently been around there for generations. Okay? Charles Wallace comes out, page 57, and asks her what happened. What do you mean? Something happened. Something frightened you. I was almost asleep and I felt you screaming. She says, I didn't want to tell you about it. Excuse me. I don't want it to have happened. What happened? You've got to tell me. I don't doubt you dragons anymore. No dragons can be more incredible than Mr. Jenkins coming to look for me in the garden and then turning into a great shrieking bird of nothingness. Charles Wallace turns around. Who's here? There's somebody here, somebody near. And what does he see? They hear the sharp crack of a breaking twig. And Charles Wallace says, my dragons. They turn around and they saw there by the great rock wings. Hundreds of wings. Spreading, folding, stretching, eyes. How many eyes can a drive of dragons have? Small jets of flame. And a voice comes out of the middle of the woods and says, do not be afraid. Huge dark form approaches them. And we find out the drive of dragons is actually just one creature. What is it actually?
A cherubim.
It's a cherubim, which Scripture describes as six-winged, many-eyed. Each wing covers its eyes. Okay? Six wings. It's in the Old Testament when God tells Moses to build a tabernacle, not the big tabernacle, the tent kind of tabernacle, but a tabernacle that will house essentially a box, the Ark of the Covenant, which will house, Moses' staff and the Ten Commandments and stuff. On top of that tabernacle, or on top of that box, there will be put 2 gold cherubim. Okay? And with 2 of their wings, they stretch forward like this. And the other 2 wings, I think, are stretching outwards, and I can't remember. I think one's this way and one's like this way. So it's like 2, 4, 6. Okay? Wings in constant motion, covering, uncovering the eyes. When the wings were spread out, they had a span of at least 10 feet. When they were all folded in, it looks like a misty, feathery sphere. Charles Wallace goes up to the big man thing and says, who are you? Teacher. Wish you were my teacher. I am. So the teacher tells them what this thing, the cherubim's name is, the dragon. Progonoskis. What does Meg nickname him? Because Progonoskis is a hard name to remember. Progo. Okay? And he tells them what Progo is. And Progo says to Charles Wallace, I suppose you think I ought to be a golden-haired baby face with no body and 2 useless little wings. In other words, the fat little cherub that you see on, Valentine's Day. Okay? Calvin, cherubim's plural. I am practically plural. The little boy thought I was a drive of dragons, didn't he? I'm certainly not a cherub. I am a singular cherubim. Why are you here? I was sent. Why? To be in your class. I don't know what I've done to be assigned to a class with such immature earthlings. Okay, Meg, how old are you? Immaterial. What kinds of things, what kind of questions does Meg repeatedly ask that she will be told is unimportant or immaterial? When you're dealing with things like the cherubim, for example.
Just
Size.
age.
Age. Place. What are all of these things?
Irrelevance. For us, not irrelevant, but for sure.
Okay, what else are they? They're all dimensions. You know? So then you have the 3 dimensions plus the 4th dimension of time. Okay? The 3 dimensions of place, where, etc. So, why is Blagini, the teacher, and Progo there? What do they tell Meg, Calvin, and Charles Wallace about Charles Wallace?
That to help them, they need to pass tests.
Okay, page 64. one of them asks, then why are you here? That Blagini might have been solely to help her brother did not seem at all astonishing to Meg. He says, you must not take yourself so seriously. Why should school be easy for Charles Wallace? Well, it shouldn't be this bad. I mean, it's the United States of America. He will have to learn to defend himself. Charles Wallace, that's right. It's a question of learning to adapt. Nobody can do that for me. If everybody will leave me alone and stop trying to help me, I'll learn eventually how not to be conspicuous. He'll learn not to use words like farandoli and mitochondria. Okay? But he says, I'm not here to give help. I'm here to ask for help. Huh? Blagini, you are called. And nobody who is invited to study with one of the teachers is called because he's needed. Page 65. You have talents we cannot afford to lose. We must find out what is making you ill and, if possible, make you well again. Okay? That is, we need you, Charles Wallace, Meg, and Kellen, to help us figure out what is wrong with Charles Wallace. Meg, can you help? I think that it is you who must help. Me, I'd do anything. Calvin, too. How can we help? You will learn as the lessons progress. Okay? So he strides across the pasture, drops down on the rock, lays down on the rock, Meg on one side, Calvin on the other side. He indicates the sky, and he says, where's my school? There. Here, there, everywhere. In the schoolyard during first grade recess with the cherubim and seraphim, among the farandoli. He says, my school building is the entire cosmos, page 68. He says, before your time with me is over, I may have to take you great distances to strange places. So he and Progo talk to them, and Meg asks, what's my first assignment? That is, if I'm in school, I got to have homework. What's my first assignment? He frowns, says, I got to think of ways to put it that you will understand. You must pass 3 tests, or trials. And you have to start immediately on the first one. Well, what is it? You've got to discover it for yourself. You have to figure out what the trial is you must pass. But how? Can't tell you. Got to find out on your own. But you won't be alone. Prognoskis is to work with you. What if we fail? It's possible. I prefer you don't. Remember, these 3 trials will be nothing you could imagine or expect right now. But I can't take a cherubim to school with me. Oh, don't worry. He can, disappear. He's not always visible, Okay. So, let's see here. We find out Luis, the snake, is kind of in cahoots with Blagini. I'm going to skip a bunch. Yeah, skip a bunch. I'm actually skipping a bunch of stuff that I thought I'd talk about. Go to the chapter Prognoski, chapter 4, page 87. We're going to stop if we don't get there early, but we're going to stop at 123 because that's right in the middle. So the next day comes, and Meg and Progo are talking, and he says, top of 87, we have to find out what our first ordeal is. Don't you know? Why would I know? You're a cherubim. Well, even cherubim have limits, he says. He says when 3 ordeals are planned, nobody knows ahead of time what they are. Even the teacher may not know. Then what do we do? How do we find out? How is Meg approaching this ordeal or this trial?
Like head on.
Logically. Okay, you have something to overcome, so what do? You take the very first step at it. There are going to be 3 trials. How do I know what my first trial is? What do I do? How do I decipher it? Okay. Progo says, bottom of age 87, well, if you've been assigned to me, then you must be some kind of a namer. A what? A namer. Last time I was with a teacher, he says, at school as you might call it, he said I had to memorize the names of the stars. Which? All of them. Wait, all of them? All of them. Okay, so she says, all right, so if I'm a namer, 88, what does that mean? What does a namer do? Well, the ending on any verb indicates agent of, person who performs the action of what? Naming. So you name something. Progo says, when I was memorizing the names of the stars, part of the purpose was to help them each to be more particularly the particular star each one was supposed to be. That's what a namer's job is. You're supposed to make earthlings feel more human. So that means she goes up to Charles Wallace and goes, you are Charles Wallace. And he suddenly goes, that's me. No. What does that mean? She asks. He asks, how do I make you feel? Confused. Who makes you least confused, Calvin? Notice, not mother, not father, not Charles Wallace, not the twins, Calvin. When I'm with Calvin, I don't what? Mind being me. Why can't she say that answer about her mother?
Because she thinks her mother's like so beautiful. And
When she's with her mother, she sees herself in comparison to her mother. And her mother's beautiful and brilliant. In contrast, Meg is not. Is it that Calvin is not beautiful and brilliant, handsome and brilliant? No, he is handsome and brilliant. Not brilliant to the level of her parents. Okay. So what does she mean? When I'm with Calvin, I don't mind being me. Progo says, you mean he makes you more you, don't you? Yeah, I guess you could put it that way. In other words, he makes her accept herself as she is. Who makes you feel the least you? Mr. Jenkins. Notice, no thought, didn't have to think about it. Why are you suddenly upset and frightened? Well, he's the principal of the grade school. She just goes on and on. Okay? He never understands anything. Is that all? What do you mean? When you say, Mr. Jenkins, I feel such a cold wave of terror. And she tells him about what happened the night before. Okay? This may be important, he says. So she explains. And two eyes look out from under one wing. And Progo says, Echthroi. It was an ugly word. As Progonowski's uttered it, the morning seemed colder. What did you say? You're Mr. Jenkins, the real one. Could he do anything like you just told me about? And does good Mr. Jenkins actually turn into a bird and fly away and rip the fabric of reality?
I don't know what he does in his spare time. So.
Yeah. She says no. You say it was like a dark bird, but a bird that was nothingness, and he tore the sky? Well, that's how I remember it. Sounds like the Echthroi. The what? Echthroi. I mean, if you don't know the Echthroi, we can't really. We need to go see your Mr. Jenkins. The one you say is at your little brother's school. Why? And he's trying to figure out how to explain this. I think you have seen an Echthroi, page 91. If we are dealing with Echthroi, then I just know with every feather on my wings that we have to go see this Mr. Jenkins. It must be part of the trial. But that doesn't make any sense. It does to me. Okay? It's impossible, she says. I can't. If you have seen an Echthroi, page 92, everything is different. And so he tells her, don't worry, not everybody can see me. In other words, who can see him? Only those that he wants to see him. Why? He says, I'm real, page 92, and most earthlings can bear very little reality. What does he mean? Henry David Thoreau said something very similar in his little book on Walden. He said, most people live lives of quiet desperation. They walk around every day from when they wake up in the morning to when they go to bed at night, half asleep. He said they don't really see what is around them. It's almost like they're in a daze. The reason he goes off to live in the woods is he says, I want to live life deliberately. I want to front nature. Even though he sends his laundry back into Concord and has Mrs. Emerson doing the laundry for him. Okay? So, Progo asks Meg, are you feeling brave? No. Think we're going to have to be brave. It's going to be easier if we're together. I wonder if the teacher knows. Knows what? That you've seen an ectros. What is an ectros? I'll take you someplace yesterday and show you. She's like, what? How do you take me someplace yesterday? No, you can take me sometime yesterday. Well, I can't take you today. It's silly for you to go into breakfast and your mother dislikes tardiness. Who knows what we may have to do or where we may have to go before tomorrow. Okay? So she looks into one of his eyes and is pulled into it. Where are we? Doesn't matter. Watch. And there came a sound which was beyond sound, a violent, silent electrical report which made her press her hands in pain against her ears. Across the sky, where the stars were clustered, as thickly as in the Milky Way, a crack shivered, slivered, became a line of nothingness. Kind of makes me wonder if James Moffat, the writer for a bunch of the Doctor Who series, had read these when he came up with the crack in the time. Progo, what is it? What happened? The Ecroi have X'd. What? Annihilated, negated, extinguished. That was the most terrible thing she'd ever seen. More horrifying. And so she tries to shut it out. She tried to think of the most comfortable thing possible, the safest, most reasonable, ordinary thing. What then? Dinner table at home, winter, red curtains, etc. Okay? And he says, it's not just in distant galaxies these things are happening. Unreason has crept up on us so insidiously, we've hardly been aware of it. But think of the things going on in our own country, which you wouldn't have believed possible only a few years before. Okay, this is Meg Wynn, back in time. She's hearing this. Mrs. Murray, I don't think I believe all of them now, although I know they're happening. The irrational violence is even worse in the cities. This is 1973. Okay? At least when the book is published. So they keep talking about the violence running rampant through the country. She talks about isolating farandoli and such. Meg turns from the kitchen sink at the pain in her mother's voice, page 98. She sees her father reach across. And they're talking about reality falling apart. And Mrs. Murray says, I can't settle for what my intellect tells me. That's not all of it. In other words, the darkness, the ecthroi aren't going to win. There's something that tells her it's not all there is. Mrs. Murray, what else is there? Mr. Murray says that. Mrs. Murray, what else is there? And he replies, there are still stars which move in ordered and beautiful rhythm. There are still people in this world who keep promises. Even little ones, like your cooking stew over your Bunsen burner. You may be in the middle of an experiment, but you still remember to feed your family. That's enough to keep my heart optimistic, no matter how pessimistic my mind. What's he mean? Not everybody is selfish. Not everybody is only thinking of themselves. There are still people doing what Robert Fulghum described in his book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Random acts of kindness. Little random acts of kindness that are what? They are like candles in the dark. He says, these are what keep me going. Notice, he doesn't say there are more random acts of kindness than there are random acts of violence. He kind of implies a situation where it looks like everything's getting bleak. And there's a lot more violence than there is kindness. Okay? Progo. Wise man, your father. You heard me? And so he explains to her about tithing. He says, you're beginning to learn how to tithe, page 99. What? Tithe. It's how cherubim talk. It's talking without words. Just the way that I can be myself and not be enfleshed. Meg, yeah, but I have to be enfleshed. If I have no flesh, I have no words, you know. He says, I know. And I will keep things worded for you. That is, I'll keep using words for you. But it will help if you remember that cherubim tithe without words. It says, for a human creature, you show a distinct talent for tithing. What does that tell us? If she shows that talent, who else does?
Charles Wallace.
Charles Wallace. He says, in fact, let's try, right? So relax. Let me move about where? In her mind. Okay. Out of the corner of her mind's eye, she sees 3 Greek letters. Okay. Epsilon, chi, and theta. That's ekth, the cherubim told her. Ekthoi. But how could Father think of the conversation we just recalled? Your parents are very aware of the evil in the world. They'd have to be blind not to be, right? She says, okay, yes, I know. Open your eyes, look where the sky is torn. I don't want to. Go on. He says, I'm looking at it with all my eyes open. You've only got 2. She looks. She wonders what this phenomenon has to do with Charles Wallace. How did the ectoi do that? He says it has to do with unnaming. If we are namers, the ectoi are unnamers. And what does it have to do with Mr. Jenkins? He says, we need to find him to find that out. It's part of our first ordeal. Okay? She says, he says, this is your home. Charles Wallace is your brother, top of 102. You're the one who knows Mr. Jenkins. You must tell me what we're to do now. She's like, too much responsibility. I'm still only a child. She's only 13. I didn't ask for any of this. So you're not going to take the test? I didn't ask for any of this. Well, who else can say that?
Charles.
Every freaking person on the planet can say that, right? We all have tests. I don't mean these kinds. We don't ask for them. I didn't get asked to be born in the family I was born into. I'm not knocking my family. I love my family. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people get born into horrible families. If you read the news or heard the news about Kevin Spacey yesterday, you know, molesting a 14-year-old kid 30-some years ago, and then his older brother comes out and announces, oh, by the way, you may not want to, come down quite as hard on dear old Kevin, because our father was a Hitler-loving child rapist who used to rape us. Kind of goes, okay, still what he did to the 14-year-old was wrong. Doesn't explain it, doesn't justify it, but it kind of makes you go, man, really sucks to be him. Okay?
Kind of gives you perspective.
Gives you a little perspective. Again, doesn't justify, doesn't negate, etc. So, she says, you can't put that on me. I'm just a kid. So you're not going to do it? I didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for any of this. She didn't ask to be Charles Wallace's sister either. She likes that part. Meg, are you going to enter into the ordeal? I must know. Why? Because he says, if you're not, then he will do what?
X himself.
He'll do what's necessary. Okay? So, the first test. She looks at Mr. Jenkins, who comes out. And we're told, page 107, this sounded too good to be true. He talks about Charles Wallace, and he says, page 108, that is nonsense. Mr. Jenkins said to Mr. Jenkins. Why? Because there are 3 Mr. Jenkinses. We cannot make an exception for any one child. Charles Wallace Murray must learn to manage. The second Mr. Jenkins was standing beside Mr. Jenkins. Now there's 2 of them. Progonowski's shimmers, but doesn't materialize. Meg backs into him. And she hears, we're namers, we're namers. What is their name, Mr. Jenkins? No, you don't understand, Meg. This is the test. One of those is an ecthroi. We have to know which is the real Mr. Jenkins. Can you feel into me? Can't you, Kive? Can't you feel into them? He says, not when I don't know who they are. You're the only one who knows the prototype. The what? The real Mr. Jenkins. The one the other 2 are based upon. Notice, you're the only one who knows the real one. I'm thinking, you don't have to think out loud. You don't even have to talk to think, Meg. Just Kive. Okay? So, she does. They talk back and forth. And Meg says, I still don't know what a namer is, page 111. I've told you. A namer has to know who people are and who they are meant to be. Why are they here, the ecroi? He says, they're always about when there's war. They start all war. You haven't told me really what they are. What does he finally say?
They're demons.
In your mythology, they would be called fallen angels, demons. War and hate are their business. Okay? One of their chief weapons is unnaming, making people not know who they are. Making people forget themselves. How so? What do people often do in fits of anger and rage?
Say what they don't mean.
Say what they don't mean, or things they wouldn't normally do if what? They were in their right minds. If they remembered themselves. If someone knows who he really is, then what?
He doesn't need the hate.
He doesn't need to hate. Why? Because the other can't really do anything to me. See, hatred is always what?
Outside.
Always a response. Always. But if someone really knows who they are, they can do what? Control that response. They don't give somebody else control over themselves. See, that's what happens when you get really, really angry at somebody. What have you just done?
Give them control.
You've given them the reins so that or spurs, so that they can sit there and kick those spurs into you and make you angrier and angrier and angrier. But if you are totally in control, if you know who you are, you do what? You brush it off. Okay? He says, there is war in heaven, 1:12, and we need all the help we can get. The ecthroi is spreading. They're after Charles Wallace. The balance of the universe may be altered by the outcome. She's like, this is crazy. Now there's 3 of them. How am I supposed to choose the right one? How do I do it? She asks the bottom of 113. He says, there's a word, but if I say it, you'll just misunderstand. Say it. It's a 4-letter word. She's thinking, we're not supposed to use 4-letter words. Those are bad words. Luf. What? Love. That's what makes persons know who they are. You're full of love, Meg, but you don't know how to stay within it when it's not easy. What's he getting at? And we'll just stop with this. What must Meg do to name Mr. Jenkins?
You must love him.
How? Rip it all off and get down and dirty?
Oh,
No.
whoa.
Hopefully not. So how does it mean for her to love him?
Like, love the idea of him, like, of him as a person.
Or
You-
maybe respect him.
Okay, part of it?
love that he's there.
To see the real him. Okay? What is the real Mr. Jenkins?
Mr. Jenkins.
Nope. Where have we seen the real Mr. Jenkins? What is all of Meg's interactions with Mr. Jenkins about? Either her problems at school or Charles Wallace's problems at school. But what did she learn about Mr. Jenkins from Calvin?
That Mr. Jenkins had bought Calvin a new pair of shoes and tried to make him look beat up so Calvin wouldn't really feel bad about taking them.
Calvin was poor and couldn't afford a pair of shoes. Mr. Jenkins did what? Out of the kindness of his heart, he bought him shoes. Is Mr. Jenkins a horrible, rotten, no good, do-rotten person?
Nope.
No. No. Deep inside, he's not. Okay? And yet he has this persona. Okay, we'll stop there. So finish this for, I don't even remember what day this is. Tuesday. Finish this.